Okay, welcome to the C1 revision guide. This is obviously part 1. So I think I'm going to have it in 2 parts, and what I'm going to try to do is limit the video to 45 minutes each. Okay, so this part of the video is, by the way, I'm going to apologise in advance for my croaky voice. I've got a bit of a cough at the moment, so I'll try and make sure that doesn't impede the recording too much. So let's just get on with it, shall we? Okay, starting off from fossil fuels. Okay, your job number 1 is to realise that fossil fuels, we burn them for energy, and they were made from living things millions of years ago. What you need to know is that there are 3 types of fossil fuels. Okay, and those 3 types of fossil fuels are obviously coal, oil and gas. Okay, now the thing that you need to know about fossil fuels is that they took millions of years to form. Okay, and that the Earth's conditions, the conditions on the Earth have changed so much that they can't be made again. So the conditions that allowed them to be made in the first place can't be there again. So once they're gone, they are gone forever. We call that non-renewable. Okay, we can also call them finite. Okay, which is the opposite to infinity. So it's finite, which means that it can't go on forever. Okay, so it took millions of years to form, and they can't be made again. Okay, those are the 2 key things you need to remember about fossil fuels. Okay, so crude oil. Crude oil, how was it made? It was made from the bodies of plankton. Okay, plankton died, and when they sank to the bottom of the ocean, they become compressed over 260 to 650 million years. Okay, here is some few pictures of some plankton, some sea creatures I'm talking about right now. And obviously, sea creatures sink to the bottom, and over millions of years, the oil forms at the bottom, and obviously we drill to be able to get to it. Okay, obviously we'll be able to get oil and gas in the same kind of area. Okay, another picture demonstrating that over millions of years, and here we are, man-made rig, taking out the trapped gas and the trapped oil. Okay, right, now, once we've taken out the oil, okay, when we take that oil in its pure form, it's going to be crude oil. Okay, now crude oil is very, very thick. We can't obviously put it straight into a petrol tank. Okay, that's what crude oil looks like. Okay, now this crude oil, okay, so we can't use this oil because it's too thick, so it needs to be separated out and processed, right? So we need to be able to get this is petrol, we need to be able to get petrol from crude oil. And how do we do that? How do we separate out crude oil? Well, we use a process called fractional distillation. Okay, now people always confuse fractional distillation and cracking up together. Make sure you know the difference. Fractional distillation is just about separating out crude oil, okay, into its different fractions. Crude oil contains hydrocarbons of different lengths. This means that some are small and some are larger. So obviously that is 1 carbon atom with 4 hydrogen, and this shows 5 carbon atoms, and this shows even more, like 7 carbon atoms. So crude oil contains fractions of different numbers of carbon atoms. Okay, so what happens is that crude oil is heated, and all the light fractions go to the top and all the heavy fractions go to the bottom. And obviously this is a hydrocarbon, showing carbon and hydrogen right there. Okay, so if you actually look at the process, what happens is that the crude oil goes into a furnace and is heated up to 370 degrees, as you can see there. Okay, most of the oil then turns into vapor, okay, and then it will begin to go up the fractionating column. Okay, so eventually it goes and hits these plates, and then condensation happens, okay, and all of the different fractions begin to go at different levels. Okay, now so you can see that these are the heavier fractions and those are the light fractions. So the key with fractional distillation is that the fractions are all separated out according to these boiling points. Okay, now the boiling points are there because of how big the fractions are. So the smaller fractions have a low boiling point, okay, and they're light in colour and easy to light, and they're running. Okay, like petrol or LPG gas. Okay, and the heavier ones have a higher boiling point, and they're dark in colour and they're harder to light. A bit like bitumen, which is used for roads and roofing. Okay, so, and these are all the ones in between, so make sure that you know all what the fractions are. I'll show you the fractions in a little while. So the key with fractional distillation is that the longer chain carbon atoms have higher boiling points and sink to the bottom of the column, and the lighter ones, okay, the small chain hydrocarbons, have lower boiling points and they light to the top. So crude oil is separated according to its boiling points to different fractions. Okay, so that's the real key thing. Smaller fractions with only a few carbon atoms have a lower boiling point and rise to the top. Okay, and larger hydrocarbons with lots of carbon atoms sink to the bottom and they have higher boiling points. So that's what we need you to know. Okay, and obviously this shows larger hydrocarbons and this is a smaller one. So these are going to have lower boiling points than this. So this is going to sink to the bottom with a heavier boiling point, and this is small, so it's going to have a lower boiling point. Okay, now this leads us on to cracking. So, with cracking. Now, those, like I already said, these are the 7 fractions that you need to know in order. Okay, LPG, petrol, paraffin, diesel, heating oil, fuel oil, and bitumen. Make sure you know all of those. Okay, and in order. Okay, one of my year 10s came up with a little mnemonic to remember this. I think it's a little bit silly, but if you want to use it, you can. It's lollipop, paper dog, having fat babies. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but my year 10s have used that and it actually works very, very well. So that's lollipop, paper dog, having fat babies. So if you can use that, then that's fine. Okay, so which fraction do you reckon gets used the most? It's obviously going to be petrol. I'm sure you guys already knew that. And so we say that the demand for petrol is very, very high. Okay, the supply, however, is how much is available. Okay, and sometimes the demand for a particular fraction is going to be higher than its supply. So, for example, the demand for petrol is higher than its supply. Okay, so how do we overcome this problem? Because so we're using too much petrol and we don't have enough of a supply. So, what we can do, okay, and like I said, leads to a petrol shortage. But what also happens is that the supply for paraffin is very, very high. So the amount of paraffin we have is very, very high, and the demand is very, very low, which leaves us with too much paraffin. So we're in a case here where the demand for petrol is very, very high, but the supply is low, and the supply of paraffin is very, very high, but the demand is very, very low. Is there any way of turning some of this paraffin into petrol? Well, there is a way of turning paraffin into petrol, and it's called cracking. Now, paraffin is a longer chain molecule than petrol. Okay, so if you can break paraffin to make a shorter chain like petrol, that would be ideal, and we call this cracking. Okay, so we literally crack a larger unit to make a shorter chain. And now you need to know the conditions for cracking. Now the conditions are high temperature and a catalyst. And remember, a catalyst is a metal that you can add to a reaction to make it happen quicker. Now, people confuse these two conditions with polymerization, which are very similar. Okay, I'll talk about polymerization later, by the way, but for polymerization, it's high pressure and a catalyst. But for cracking, when we want the larger unit to be broken up into a smaller unit, it's high temperature and a catalyst. Okay, now you can do this in a lab, obviously. Now this is paraffin over here with some catalyst. In our case, it's aluminium oxide, and we heat it up, and some small hydrocarbons are obviously going to bubble through this. Okay, so this is a longer chain, and when it can be split up, okay, it makes a longer chain, a shorter chain hydrocarbon, but it also makes an alkene. Okay, in this case, 2 carbon atoms and a double bond, it makes ethene. And obviously we can use this part of the fraction that comes out, this part of the product from cracking, for making plastics. We can use this for polymerization. Again, something I'm going to cover a little bit later with you all. Okay, now, so that was cracking. Now, you also need to know the environmental damage from cracking, environmental damage from extracting crude oil. Okay, so when you take oil out of the ground, okay, out of the sea or the ground, it can be very dangerous. Okay, now the reason that could be dangerous is because obviously you need to drill down, and there obviously can be some explosions. But when we've used the oil, okay, when we've pumped the oil out, it still has to be transported to our refinery, so we can do all the things like fractional distillation or cracking, etc. And we can transport the oil from where the oil's been taken out at sea by a tanker, or we can use an oil pipeline. But if this goes wrong, you can get an oil slick. Now, there was a very famous oil slick that happened in 1989 called the Exxon Valdez. Okay, now the area of which all the oil leaked onto onto the sea and onto the shore, and obviously had detrimental effects to all the wildlife. Okay, and you can see all of these pictures, and obviously when the oil gets to the shore, it's very difficult to clean up, and it destroys habitats. So it's a real big, massive problem for us. Okay, now the Exxon Valdez spilt out enough oil to fill 125 Olympic swimming pools, and obviously disrupted 1,300 miles of coastline. Okay, and that's a lot of habitat to destroy. Okay, so that's not even the biggest disaster in recent history. We've also got the BP oil disaster, which happened, and it was on board the BP Deepwater Horizon rig in 2010. Okay, it leaked 200 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, that's not a small amount. That is a lot. Okay, it was caused by an explosion on the oil rig, and obviously then the pipe started leaking. Now, the problem with all the oil when it goes into the sea, that it gets onto the bird's feathers and stops them from being buoyant, stops them from floating, so they sink and they die. The oil also gets into fish and they die, but the chemicals that they use to get rid of the oil, okay, also stay in the food chain. Now, some of the detergents, which is what they use to allow the oil and the water to mix, are not safe, and sometimes they can be worse than the oil than themselves. And obviously, the oil also destroys habitats and beaches. So this is the BP oil disaster, and you can see the explosion that happened there. And this is an aerial shot of all the oil. You can see that, and obviously these are some of the pictures of some wildlife that were obviously affected. Obviously, a sea turtle is dead, and this is the bit I was talking about. All the oil on the feathers stops the birds from being buoyant, and they can't get rid of this oil by themselves. It's going to have to take some rescue workers to be able to remove this. Okay, and unfortunately, some animals aren't so lucky. This is the underground oil tanker, and obviously this the oil pipe, and this was leaking all the oil out, and it was a big, massive problem for them. Eventually, they solved the problem, but they tried everything. They even put golf balls in to stop the leak. Okay, now it spilt out a lot of oil. We're not concerned with this, so we'll just move on. So, choosing fuels. This is on to the next bit. So fuels can be chosen based on a number of different things, like very generally how much energy they had, how easy they are to light, how much they cost, how easy they are to find, and how much pollution they give out. So let's look at all of those one by one. So these are all the factors that you need to consider when you are choosing a fuel that is appropriate. Okay, first one, energy value. Okay, now that's how much energy the fuel contains. Yep. So which one burns for longest using the same amount of mass? Now there was a question very recently in the exam about comparing two fuels, and one of them obviously both gave the same temperature change, but one of them used less mass to get the same temperature change. So obviously energy value is very important when you're choosing a fuel. Ease of use, that's how easy is it to light. Okay, cost of fuel. You obviously want a cheap fuel. I don't think that really requires any explanation. Okay, pollution caused. So CO2, if it gives off, that causes global warming or climate change. Sulfur, that's found in coal, and the sulfur dioxide builds up when the sulfur's inside in coal, and you burn that. The sulfur turns into sulfur dioxide and causes acid rain. And obviously, if the fuel doesn't burn properly, it makes carbon monoxide, which is a poisonous gas. So you've got to consider, when choosing your fuel, the pollution that it can actually cause. Availability, how easy is it to find the fuel? If you're choosing a fuel that is not very easy to find, it's not going to be very good, is it? So you obviously need to consider the availability of the fuel. Storage method, is it easy to store? Is it bulky like coal? Okay, or is it volatile like petrol and can be ignited very easily? You need to think about all those things. Is it safe to store, or does it take up a lot of space? Okay, toxicity, does it produce any toxic fumes? So if you burn the fuel and the fumes given off can harm you, then that's not good, is it? Okay, or if it gives off acidic fumes. Now, next lesson is combustion. Now, combustion is the scientific name for burning. Okay, now, so burning. Alright, these are some questions that you want to consider. What gas does it give off, and why does it give off those gases, and where does it come from? Now, when you burn fuels contain something called CNH. Okay, this is carbon and hydrogen, and they react with oxygen. Okay, now let's have a look at this. So, science behind combustion. Fuels are hydrocarbons. Okay, during combustion, carbon and hydrogen in the atoms in the fuel are oxidized. Okay, now basically what happens is, if you just consider this, so this is methane and oxygen, and when it burns it makes carbon dioxide, water and energy. Okay, this is the simple equation. I mean, they may give you another fuel like ethane, and you literally write exactly the same thing down. Yeah, so it's carbon dioxide and water. They're the products of combustion. Okay, and this is the simple formula, which can be written CH4, 2H2, CO2, and H2O, and obviously that is balanced. Okay, now, so combustion. This little experiment shows, you know, the products that get given out from combustion, which is carbon dioxide and water. We need to be able to test for those. Now, when carbon dioxide is given off, we can test that if the carbon dioxide is given off by using lime water, and the lime water goes from clear to cloudy, okay, or cloudy white. Okay, over here you've got cobalt chloride paper, and it turns from pink to blue if it's present. Okay, now when fuels, if you don't have enough oxygen, okay, then you don't get carbon dioxide produced, you get carbon monoxide produced, and a lot less heat is actually made as well. Okay, so this is called incomplete combustion. And like I've just said, incomplete combustion happens when you don't get enough oxygen getting to the flame. Okay, so it's incomplete. So instead of making carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide is made instead. What's the difference between the two? Well, carbon dioxide is two oxygen atoms with the carbon. Okay, di means two, so two oxygen atoms. Mono means one, so there's one oxygen atom. Okay, now, so that's the difference between CO and CO2. Now, the thing you need to know about carbon monoxide is that it's poisonous, and it sticks to the red blood cells and it stops them from carrying oxygen. Okay, so like I've already explained, when fuels burn with a lack of oxygen, they don't make CO2, they don't have enough oxygen, they make carbon monoxide, and it makes a yellow flame. Okay, and some of the fuel is going to be left over because it's not going to burn, and it makes soot. Okay, or you can write carbon. Okay, those are the two things. So the products of incomplete combustion are carbon monoxide and obviously carbon. Okay, or soot. Now, as I've already said, carbon monoxide, very dangerous, and it's often called a deadly killer, silent killer, sorry, because you can't see it and you can't smell it, which is why you might have a carbon monoxide detector at home. Okay, like I've shown here. Other products of combustion, like I've just said, soot and carbon atoms. Now, this picture shows you need to know the different colours of the flames that you're going to get with complete combustion and incomplete combustion. Obviously, this is complete combustion, which shows a nice blue flame, showing that a lot of energy has been released, and this is incomplete combustion, which shows a yellow flame. Okay, right, moving on. Right, obviously, they're the different products that can make carbon dioxide with complete, and carbon monoxide with incomplete. Okay, now, so environmental problems. Now, the main environmental problems you need to be concerned with is acid rain, okay, which obviously turns rainwater acidic, which kills fish and trees. Okay, obviously kills the fish in lakes, and the trees, makes the leaves turn from green to a whitish colour, which obviously kills them. There's carbon dioxide, which is linked to the greenhouse effect and global warming, okay, or climate change, which traps the sun's energy, causing the climate to warm up, and obviously carbon particles, which or particulates, which leads to global dimming, which is where there's a layer of particulates around the Earth which reflects some of the sunlight, which reduces how much sunlight can be made. Okay, so those are all the things. All right. Okay. Solutions. You can use chemical scrubbers when you burn coal in power stations to remove the sulfur dioxide from waste gases after burning, or you can actually remove the sulfur in fuels before they're burnt, like for example low sulfur fuels. Okay, now fuel is obviously a hydrocarbon with a carbon atom there and a hydrogen there. Okay, and this is a bit of an elaborate picture showing what exactly happens with combustion. Okay, this is complete combustion, where the black is the carbon, the white's the hydrogen, and they react with oxygen, making carbon dioxide and water. Okay, and this is incomplete, so when you don't have enough oxygen. By the way, guys, these aren't balanced. Okay, this is just reiterating what I've just talked about with combustion. Okay, and obviously with with fuels, if you have a petrol engine, obviously, when an engine burns, it's going to try and burn the fuel, right? Okay, so if you put petrol in, oxygen's obviously going to make its way to the fuel, which is going to make complete combustion, which is carbon dioxide, but some of the fuel is not going to burn properly, and it's also going to make some carbon monoxide. But it's not just oxygen that's going to make its way into the car engine. Also, some nitrogen, which is signified by blue, is also going to make its way into the car engine. Now, because it's very hot in the engine, that nitrogen is going to combine with oxygen, and that's going to make some nitrogen oxide, okay, or any kind of, or NOx, okay. So sometimes with one oxygen, sometimes it's two oxygens, okay. So what a catalytic converter does inside a car engine is that it combines the nitrogen oxides with the carbon monoxide, and what happens is that the oxygen comes off the nitrogen oxide and makes carbon dioxide and just free nitrogen, okay. Now, that's what a catalytic converter does. Okay, so it takes the oxygen off the nitrogen, because by the way, this causes a lot of smog, okay, the nitrogen oxides, which is another kind of form of pollution inside the car engine. So this particular bit that I've been talking about, even though it might not have been very clear, is about catalytic converters. Yeah, so they combine nitrogen, or they reduce the amount of nitrogen oxide and carbon monoxide and make more carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide and nitrogen, sorry. And there's some pictures of some catalytic converters in the bottom of the engine. So, exhaust fumes in, more carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide, but what comes out is more carbon dioxide and nitrogen, like I've just explained. Okay, now you may have to interpret some data based on that before it goes into a catalytic converter and afterwards, and you can see that the carbon monoxide obviously goes down, hydrocarbons go down, and the amount of nitrogen oxides go down, because obviously the oxygen's come off the nitrogen oxide and has gone to the carbon monoxide, which is why the carbon dioxide increases. Guys, I've really rushed through that, and obviously more nitrogen. So if you just take a look back through this data and look back through the video and try and understand what exactly is happening here, because you may have to interpret data or based on exhaust fumes. Okay, now gases in the atmosphere, this is what you need to know. 78% of the air is nitrogen, 21% is oxygen, and 0.035 is carbon dioxide. Very small amount, but obviously has a massive effect. So, now we've talked about gas in the atmosphere, you need to know a little bit about the carbon cycle. Now, the carbon cycle is reasonably easy, and it basically just explained how sometimes carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere, and sometimes carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. So you need to know about all the things that release CO2 into the atmosphere and things that take it out. So the things that release CO2 are respiration, which every living thing does, okay, combustion, which is obviously burning, okay, and decay. When the microorganisms obviously feed off dead organic matter, they might release some CO2. CO2 can be removed from the atmosphere by photosynthesis. Now this can be all shown in a little picture which shows respiration, which is what all the living things do, releasing CO2 into the atmosphere, and obviously combustion here with the house, okay, or any burning of any fuel, cars, power stations, etc. And the only thing removing the CO2 really is trees, okay, even though oceans do take up a lot of the CO2, but let's just be concerned with photosynthesis for now, which removes the CO2. Right, now, naming hydrocarbons. Now, so hydrocarbons are compounds which just contain carbon and hydrogen atoms. Okay, only carbon and hydrogen atoms. Now, if they contain any other element, then they are not a hydrocarbon. So this is a hydrocarbon. Carbon, hydrogen. Easy peasy. Yeah? This is not a hydrocarbon. It contains carbon, contains hydrogen, but it also has an oxygen atom, so it can't be considered a hydrocarbon. Okay, so now the other thing you need to know is that there are two kinds of hydrocarbons. There are alkanes, okay, and alkenes. Now, what is the difference in their spellings? Well, alkenes have a double E, don't they? Okay, and anes just have one E. Okay, now I always think of it like this. If it has a double E, then it has a double bond. Okay, so the alkanes, just one E, so they have a single bond. Alkenes have two E's, so they have a double bond. This is an alkane. Notice, it's just got carbon and hydrogen atoms, and there's no double bond. Okay, single bonds, and it ends with ane. This is an alkene. Okay, alkenes, on the other hand, okay, have two E's, so have a double bond. Okay, have a double bond, and the name always ends with ene. Double E, double bond. Okay, so naming. So when we name these hydrocarbons, they're based on two things. First of all, it's based on the number of carbon atoms they have, which gives them the first part of their name. Okay, and if they have a double or a single bond, which gives them the last part of their name. So it's either going to be ane or it's going to be ene. Now, let's look at this. So the start of the name is all based on this. So if it has one carbon atom, it's going to start with meth, 2 eth, 3 prop, 4 but, 5 pent, 6 hex, 7 sept, and 8 oct. I don't think you need to go above that. Okay. So let's just have a look at some examples of this. So what is this? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 carbon atoms is going to start with hex. Now there's no double bond, so it ends with ane. So naming me 6 carbon atoms, hex from the table, single bonds, ends with ane. So it is called hexane. Okay, this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now if it has 8, it's going to start with oct. Okay, and only single bonds, so it's going to end with ane. So it's going to be ones. No, I've gone to the wrong one. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 8 carbon atoms, has a double bond, so it's going to be octene. Okay, so there we go. Alright, so who am I? Well, you can look on the table, 2 carbon atoms, so it's going to start with, maybe I should remember. It's going to, 2 carbon atoms, going to start with eth. Okay, it just has a single carbon atom, a single double bond, so it's going to be ethene. Okay, this has 2 carbon atoms again, so it starts with eth, has a double bond, so it ends with the ene, so this is ethene. Okay, 4 carbon atoms, so it starts with but, single bond, so it ends with ane, so this is butane. Okay, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon atoms, so it starts with pent, has a double bond, so this is pentene. Okay, this 1 carbon atom, no, obviously can't have a double bond because there's only 1 carbon atom. Double bonds only happen between carbon atoms, so this is methane. Okay, this, what is this looking from the table? Well, this is not anything. Okay, so this is not a hydrocarbon. Why isn't it a hydrocarbon? Because it contains a oxygen atom. Okay, now, so this, even though this, if you ever see this and it has an OH, it tells you it's an alcohol. So if you ever see this formula and there's an OH anywhere, it tells you it's an alcohol, so it ends with ol. Okay, but then the start of the name is still the same, so it still has 2 carbon atoms, so it still starts with eth. Okay, and with the OH group it makes it an ol. Okay, so this is going to be called ethanol. Now, one more thing I want to cover with you guys is about elements and the number of atoms. Now, you get a question, and it's been in one of the papers, where it asks you how many atoms are in this compound and how many elements are in this. So elements are the different kinds of atoms. So elements is 1, which is carbon, 2, which is the hydrogen, 3. Okay, which is the oxygen. Now, if it asks you how many atoms it has, it's asking you for the total number of atoms, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it has 9 atoms, but it only has 1, 2, 3 elements. Are we clear on that? If you're not, go back through the video, because that is really, really important about knowing the different number of elements and the different number of atoms. Okay, now, chemical tests. Now, you need to know the chemical test for a compound like this. Okay, now this is an alkene because it has a double bond, but we need to be able to know how to do a chemical test to prove that it does have a double bond. Now what you do is you get some bromine water, which is normally orange like you can see here. Okay, now if you put an alkene in there, okay, it will decolorize the bromine water to make it go clear. Okay, so you can see here. Okay, this has now gone clear, so an alkene was present. So if we put some of this, okay, if we put some of this in that bromine water, will it go from orange to clear? No, it won't, because it doesn't have a double bond. This is an alkene. But if we put this compound, this ethene, okay, into the bromine water, it will decolorize the bromine water, making it turn from orange to clear. Okay, so this is a chemical test for unsaturated compounds. When I say unsaturated, I just mean a compound with a double bond. Okay, now looking at polymers. So, on to polymers. So, earlier on in the video, we talked about cracking, which was taking a longer hydrocarbon, okay, cracking it to make a shorter alkene, okay, along with an alkene. Okay, now this is a kind of thermal decomposition because obviously heated up to break it down. Okay, which involved a high temperature and a catalyst. Okay, now what we're concerned with is the opposite of that. We're concerned with making plastics, which is about taking these shorter chains, joining them up together, making longer chains. That's what we're concerned with that. So we're concerned with something called polymers. Now, all different kinds of plastics, okay, have a they basically, all the different kinds of polymers have the word poly in front of them, and you can see that right here, that you can see higher density poly everywhere. Okay, so poly, etc. You can see that, yeah? So basically what happens is that if it has the word poly in front of it, it makes it a polymer. Okay, now this is ethene. Okay, which means it has a double bond and it's an alkene. And these smaller units can be joined up to make a larger units to make plastics. Okay, so these are the monomers. Now, monomers are what we call the single unit. Remember from when we learned about carbon monoxide, the mono bit meant one. So you've got all of these single units over here, and they're joined together to make a larger unit. And you can see, right, these all have double bonds, don't they? You can see that right here. Okay, but these double bonds all disappear in the middle, don't they? Because those double bonds are actually used to make a longer unit, so those double bonds are used to join all the others together, okay, and which makes a polymer. And this is called additional polymerization, okay? So obviously it's about the formation of polymers, yeah? Okay, now, just a few words and their explanation like I've just already talked about. So small molecules join together to make a larger molecule. The smaller molecule is called a monomer, okay, and which always has to be an alkene, which has a double bond because it has two double E's, okay, and it makes a larger unit called a polymer. Okay, so mono means one, poly means many, mer equals unit, and this whole process is called additional polymerization. Okay, now conditions, like we already talked about, these are the two conditions that you guys need to be aware of. It needs high pressure and it needs a catalyst, which is the opposite to cracking, okay, because cracking needed high temperature and a catalyst, which involves breaking them down, but when you're joining them up together, you need high pressure to kind of push them together to get them to join. That's the way I always think of it. That's how I can remember which one is which, okay. So the monomer of ethene, okay, we saw it represented like this, which showed the monomers joining together to make a large unit, but you can also show it, okay, like this, by putting a bracket round the outside of it, okay, and putting an N there, and removing the double bond, okay. Now, with the naming of it, the smaller unit, 2 carbon atoms, double bond, it was called ethene, okay, but when there's loads of them joined together, you just put the word poly in front of it, okay. So instead of ethene, it's going to be polyethene, okay. Put a bracket around it and put an N and remove the double bond. Couldn't be any easier, okay. So mono is a single unit and poly is many of them joined together. This is vinyl chloride. Okay, so obviously double C with a double bond and the chlorine. If you wanted to show that being joined together, you can show it like this. You can see it has a double bond and the chlorine atoms are all there, aren't they? You can see that. And when you put them together, exactly the same thing happens, but you remove the double bond. Can you see that? Okay, double bond has all but disappeared. Okay, and or you can draw it in another way. You can draw it like this, like I've already said. Yeah. So that literally will turn into that, and you just put the bracket round the outside of it, and you put the letter N. N just stands for number, because it could be, this could be 10, 20, 100, 1,000, whatever. It's showing how many units have actually joined up together. Okay, this is just some pictures and some uses of PVC. Okay, so for pipes, for the cables which go around electrical wiring, or some people like to wear PVC jeans. Okay, so if I asked you to draw me the polymer of this, okay, which was an exam question, okay, it's quite easy. You just draw this. You just draw this. In actual fact, I might just do it for you. This might look very messy. Literally, if you wanted to do it, you'd just draw a C, okay, with all the H's. This is going to look terrible. Okay, again, This isn't actually very easy doing this on a thingy. This was actually a 6-mark question, guys, not very long ago. I think it was the June 2014 paper, sorry. And this molecule, okay, has a double bond, 3 carbon atoms, so this is actually propene, okay. Now, you notice that I've done this, and I've just literally done exactly the same thing, but put a single one in there, and then put a bracket round the outside. Oh, that looks horrible. And then put the letter N. Okay, and you obviously can talk about the conditions, and it was an easy 6-mark question. Okay, it is that easy. Okay, so now the thing about polymers is you also need to know the uses. Now, so PVC. Alright, it's waterproof, flexible, use it in raincoats. Polyethylene, which is a different polymer, obviously it's just ethene molecules joined up together, are also waterproof and flexible, but they're very, very thin, so instead of using them for raincoats like you'd use them for PVC, you use them for plastic bags. Polystyrene, like if you bought a new PlayStation or an Xbox, will come inside polystyrene wrapping because it insulates, it stops heat from moving, and it absorbs shock. That should say absorb shock here. Okay, and it's obviously used in packaging or coffee cups. And polypropylene, okay, which was this molecule right here, okay, this is polypropylene, okay, and it's strong and it's flexible and you can use it in ropes. So you might have to link the properties of different polymers up to their uses, okay. Now you have to know about a special polymer, okay, called Gore-Tex. Now, the thing about Gore-Tex is, let me just talk about nylon first of all. Now, nylon is a great material invented in a collaboration between New York and London, hence its name, NYLON, New York, London, and it's waterproof. But the problem is it's not breathable. So if you went walking out in the hills, okay, and it was raining, it would keep you waterproof. Okay, but the problem is if your sweat started to evaporate from your skin, it would have nowhere to go because the material doesn't let water in or out, and you'd get wet from your own sweat, so the sweat vapor stays inside your clothes and eventually it will make you very, very cold. So it's not breathable. Okay, it's not breathable at all. Okay, so that's quite important. Not breathable. That's nylon. Okay, whereas Gore-Tex is much better. It's not only waterproof, okay, but it's also breathable, which means that it will let the sweat vapor escape, which stops you from getting wet. Okay, but it's also waterproof. Okay, so the sweat can evaporate, which means it's breathable, but it's also waterproof. Why are we studying Gore-Tex? Because it's a polymer. It works by layers of polymer layers built on top of each other, and the technical name for that is PTFE. I don't think you really need to know that, but it's poly, which means it's a polymer, tetra, which means 4, fluoro, which means it must contain fluorine, and ethene. Okay, so this is how it makes it waterproof. So the rain droplets can't get through, but the sweat vapor can escape. Okay, and you can get different clothing which are waterproof, different clothing which are made of Gore-Tex. So, for example, these motorbike gloves, okay, will let the sweat evaporate from your hands, but it won't let any water through. You can see that, yeah, but sweat can evaporate. Okay, now comparing nylon with Gore-Tex. Now, this was also a question in the June 24 paper, which you had to talk about how they're both waterproof, both flexible, but nylon is non-breathable, okay, whereas Gore-Tex is breathable. Okay, now, polymers in healthcare. You need to know how polymers can be used in healthcare. First one is contact lenses, which allows them to stay wet on the eye, okay. There is teeth fillings, so this is the polymer material which you can't see, but the old amalgam fillings which contain mercury, you can see them and they're horrible and black, and now these days all polymers are white. Okay, so obviously people don't know that you've had a filling in. Okay, wound dressing is now waterproof, okay, which is made from a polymer material. Back in the day, wound dressing was not waterproof, so if it got wet you have a higher risk of infection. Okay, so you need to know contact lenses and the comparison between the polymer and the non-polymer. So contact lens, stay wet on the eye, non-polymer, dry on the eye. Teeth filling, attractive because it's white, non-polymer looks metallic, contains mercury. Wound dressing, waterproof, and obviously the non-polymer gets wet and you have a high risk of infection. Okay, now you need to be able to dispose of polymers. Okay, now the thing about polymers is that they're non-biodegradable. Now it's important that you know what that term means. That means that microorganisms like bacteria can't rot them away. So more of a technical way of saying it, okay, is that non-biodegradable material cannot be decomposed, which means broken down, by bacteria. Okay, so it means some plastic's going to be there for 100 years. So you need to know where you can actually put them, because they can build up. Okay, obviously this is a river, believe it or not. Okay, and these are all the plastics. They don't decompose and they just float to the surface. Okay, so it becomes a little bit of a problem, doesn't it? Okay, scientists want, so even when we put it in the ocean 20 times, we think there might be 27 times more plastics in the oceans than we realise. 3 ways you can dispose of plastics. Now you need to know all of these. Landfill sites, burning them, and recycling. Those are the 3 that you need to know. You don't only just need to know the 3 types of ways in which you can dispose of polymers, you need to know the problems associated with each of those 3. So let's just deal with landfill sites first of all. We're running out of space and it wastes land. Okay, and the second thing is that landfill sites also give out toxic gases. Okay, so yeah, burning plastics, they give off toxic gases. Okay, as you can see here, so this person's been burning plastics and obviously giving off horrible gases. So don't burn plastics. Okay, whatever. And recycling. Okay, now recycling is great. Okay, but the problem is, who's going to separate out all that rubbish? And the problem is that when we have to separate out that rubbish, it costs a lot in labour. Okay, so obviously these people have to separate out all the plastics, so you get a problem with labour costs, and you can see that. So can we help? Yes, we can, which is why we've got all of the different colour bins to help recycling a little more. Okay, now if you don't put the right stuff in the right bins, you can get fined. Yeah, bin sinners fined £110. Okay, now on to cooking food. Now,